Hey guys, welcome back to the Psalms to Guide YouTube channel. This is Breakfast and Bible, where we are talking about women of God. We're talking about what it means to be a woman of God and what the word says about being a woman. This has been a topic that has been near and dear to my heart as I've become older, because I just felt like there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of things that are not really focused on in the church as it pertains to what it means to be a real woman of God and what is actually said about women of God in the Bible. Most of the time we just get skimmed over, and the women that are there, no one really stops to look at what they've done or what they've accomplished. And that was kind of my motivation of starting this series. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to dedicate to just, cranking out a video every single week or every other day, even though I would like to. So bear with me if you are just tuning in. There are a few videos that are already up if you've been following along with me. I have plenty more in my mind. I just working at getting them cranked out. And so I hope that you will stick around and continue to join in. And as always, I am welcome and open to your feedback. Leave me messages in the comments if there are topics that you want to hear about, if there are particular women you want to discuss, or if there are questions or something that I missed when I was talking about it. You know what to do. Leave me a comment, leave me a message, and I will try to get to it. Today, we are going to be talking about a woman that I think is super important. I really loved her story. I really related to her story. In the sense of I had a lot of questions, not related to like I've been there or done that, but just I had a lot of questions. And so I'm really excited to jump into this and talk about it. Today, we are talking about the lovely Abigail. So Abigail is one of the first wives of David, the king. This is, I think, before he actually becomes King David. But how they meet and how she ends up becoming the wife of this king is a very interesting story. So today we are going to talk about mediating like Abigail. Now, before I jump into the topic and talk about her, I do want to also add in a disclaimer. I've noticed that throughout these weeks, I have been showing my journal and I've been showing you at the end how I create the pages. So if you're new, if you stick around to the end, there will be video footage of me creating the journal pages. But I haven't really discussed the imagery. So I've been using these stickers throughout my journal, and I have several different characters that I've been using that are diverse. Because I like to show diversity in my journals because, we women of God come in many shapes, sizes, colors, and that is very, very important to show. But I realized I didn't mention that, so I just kind of stick the stickers in as I go, and then when I come and I talk about it, you see the journal and you see characters. And a lot of times I'll have like 2 or 3 on a page, but in this case, I just have this one sticker because it's so large. And I realized that it looks like I'm saying this is Abigail, but it is not. This is just a random sticker of a woman that I have put here. And as we go on to the next thing, you'll see this is the same girl, and then I have a different girl here on this page. So I just wanted to make that disclaimer that when you see these images, they're really just for artistic value and to include diverse women throughout the pages that represent us learning about these women of God. We don't know what any of the biblical characters look like, and I think it does more harm than help to actually assign imagery to each person or to try to depict them because of the complications that we have today with race, beauty standards, size, etc., etc. I think it's better to just leave it at what is actually written in the text. So that being said, we're going to talk about Abigail, who may have looked like this and may not have looked like this. But the name Abigail actually means joy of the father, or the father of joy, or something like that. That is the original Hebrew. It's actually Abigail. it's not a B sound. It's actually a V sound, I think, in the original Hebrew. And I'm taking that definition from Strong's H26. I will link that in the description box for those who are interested in tracing back words the way I am. So the story of Abigail is pretty deep and pretty interesting. Before we actually get into the passage, which is in 1 Samuel chapter 25, if you want to go ahead and flip there. But there were a couple of things that I wanted to talk about the introduction of Abigail. So when we first get introduced to Abigail, we're told that she is intelligent and attractive, and that she's a wife. So she's introduced as the wife of Nabal, and we are told that she is intelligent and attractive. Now, I thought it was interesting because the author says that she is intelligent first and then attractive. And even though it's not explicitly said that one is more important than the other or one is more pronounced than the other or anything like that, usually if I say, hey, describe such and such to me, let's say I'm telling you to describe to me your best friend. The first word that comes out of your mouth is usually the dominating trait that you think of when you think of that person. So if I ask you to describe them and the first word out of your mouth is hilarious, then that is the most encompassing thing. It doesn't mean that's all they are to you. It doesn't mean that's the only thing that's important, but it means that that's the first thing that comes to your mind. That is the overwhelmingly the most powerful thing about them to you. So if you're talking about somebody and the first thing out of your mouth is that they're beautiful, that's the first thing that you noticed, or that's the first thing that comes to your mind. In this case, the first thing the author says is intelligent and then beautiful. So while Abigail was beautiful, her intellect must have spoken volumes above her beauty, that the author is putting more emphasis on the fact that she is intelligent over the fact that she is beautiful. Now, that being said, I thought it was interesting because she's being called intelligent, which is not what we think of when people really start talking about women of old time. When people start talking about the Bible and women, conservatives, definitely if you grew up in a conservative church and they talk about women's roles, they're going to focus on, cooking, cleaning, being a mother, things like that. They're not going to be like, women of God are intelligent, though there is quite a bit of evidence that says that they are and that they were. So I thought it was interesting that she was explicitly described as intelligent, but I also quickly wanted to look at the word attractive. So the first version that I read was from the Complete Jewish Study Bible, which I had handy, and that's what was in front of me. And it said attractive. But I also have a CSB and a New King James version and a King James. I have a lot of different versions of the Bible. And so I had another version sitting next to me and I was reading it and it said beautiful. And I was like, is there a difference? Like, are these two words really synonymous, attractive and beautiful? When I think of the word attractive, I think of more than like a skin deep beauty. It's not just, oh, this person looks good. There's other things about them. So like this intelligence piece is also attractive, or the way that they move, like the way they talk, the way they carry themselves. All of those things can be attractive. So to me, attractive encompasses your whole self, your intelligence, your spirituality, your emotions, everything about you is attractive. Beautiful is more of just like you look nice. It's something nice to look at. So I was curious and I ended up looking up a bunch of different verses, a bunch of different translations of the verse to see what is most popularly used. So beautiful is used the most. It's used about 15 times, maybe more. I didn't count super precisely, but a few use attractive, some use comely, which is an old way of saying beautiful, and then one used fair form, which I guess that means beautiful. And then I did the same thing with intelligent, because as I was looking up beautiful, I realized that intelligent was not standard across the board either. Most translations do use the word intelligent, but some use discerning, understanding, prudent, wise, clever, and sensible. And these are not exactly synonymous. Like, for instance, between intelligent and wise, like, I think of intelligence as knowing and wise as doing or applying. I feel like being wise is the application of intelligence. Similar on discerning means that you're able to discern truth or discern right from wrong. You can be very intelligent but not be discerning, if that makes any sense. So there's like a couple of words here that I don't necessarily think are exactly the same, but overall, when you look at the verse and when you look at the original Hebrew, I think and when you look at it in the context of the story, I think it meant that I would lean towards discerning and wise, and being intelligent in how to resolve a problem. So overall, she was a very clever. Maybe clever is the word that I would use, that I think encompasses it the best. So I would say she's clever. So that being said, let's jump into the story of Abigail. Now, Abigail's husband is described as being mean and surly, which is contrasted with her being intelligent and beautiful. And I think that that's beautiful because it's saying that intelligence and beauty go hand in hand with loving your neighbor and being a decent human being. And that's contrasted to being mean and surly. And I think it's interesting because we as human beings don't define beauty in that way. I think when we say certain words, like, we think that we're all talking about the same thing, but we're not. Just by saying beauty and saying that this is aligned with being good doesn't necessarily mean that we're talking about the same thing, right? People that we might call ugly, God would call beautiful because their soul is beautiful, right? There's a verse that talks about how God looks at the heart, but man looks at the outward appearance. And I think that that's showing here with this contrast of saying, Abigail was beautiful and intelligent, but her husband was mean and surly. Because technically you could be beautiful, intelligent, mean, and surly all together based on how we as humans define beauty and intelligence. But this text is saying that, this is a contrast, that if you're mean and surly, you're not beautiful and intelligent. And if you're beautiful and intelligent, you are not mean and surly. And so I think that's important and beautiful to see that in the beginning. So what we know is that Nabal, her husband, is a very wealthy man, and his servants are out and they encounter David and his men. This is while David is on the run from Saul. And during this time, David's men protect Nabal's men while they're like feeding their sheep and all of this other stuff. So basically, David does a great service for Nabal's men, essentially. And as David is moving through his journey, he basically sends one of his servants to Nabal to request hospitality. And the proper thing for Nabal to do would have been to serve David and his servants as guests and to provide some sort of hospitality for them. But Nabal refuses. And not only does he refuse, but he's very arrogant about it. He's kind of like, who is he? I can't go around providing for any and everybody that comes calling. It's very much of like, I refuse. Like, he's not worth my time, etc., etc. And so when David's servant takes this message back to David, David is mad. All right, y'all. David always had a bit of a little anger thing, or a little exaggeration of how to handle situations. So David's solution is to kill everybody. No, seriously. David was like, I'm going to kill everybody. Specifically, he was going to kill all of the males in the household, presumably the animal males as well. And so that's like straight mafia style vengeance. Like, David wasn't playing no games. He told his servants, get your swords ready. We're going in. We're going to kill some people. So they're moving towards Nabal's house to execute this plan. Luckily for Nabal's house, one of the servants overheard Nabal telling David's servant this and went back and told the lady of the house, Abigail. And Abigail was intelligent and discerning and realized that was a problem and it was going to get them killed. So Abigail pulls together a meal, like a whole lot of rationings, and takes them to David and pleads for forgiveness. She provides all of the hospitality that he was owed, and then she apologizes for Nabal's behavior, and then she reminds David that he is not supposed to be taking vengeance for himself, but that vengeance is supposed to be something that comes from the Lord. And so she, in doing so, spares her entire household. Now, when she comes back home, she doesn't directly tell her husband. She doesn't run in and be like, yo, husband, I saved us, because the husband is drunk. So she waits for him to sober up and tells him the next morning what has happened with David. And when she tells him what happened, he has a stroke or a heart attack or something. And he tarries on for, a few days after, and then he basically just dies. In his death, David hears about it, and David sends for Abigail and makes her one of his wives. Abigail becomes one of the first 3 women that married David. So his first wife was Michal, the daughter of Saul. When Saul got upset with David, he took Michal from David and gave her to some other man. So at this point, David is technically unmarried-ish, but he marries Abigail and this other woman. They're mentioned at the same time, so I'm not sure which of them he marries first, but Abigail may have been his second wife or may have been his third wife. So that is the story of Abigail in a nutshell. But you guys know that that's not all there is. We're going to dig in and talk about some of these things because it's really, really interesting, and a lot of things stood out to me. So the first thing that stood out to me was that Abigail doesn't consult her husband about any of this. She could have gone up to him and been like, so the servant told me yada, 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 and I think that's a mistake, blah, blah, blah. She could have had a conversation with him. Which I think in a lot of modern conversations, we talk about compromise, we talk about communication and things like that. And there's this idea that you're supposed to communicate. And when we talk about women being submissive, that is the first thing that you think of, is that you would ask, that you would talk it out, that you would say like, hey, I saw that you did this, and I respect you as the head of the household, but, I was thinking maybe we should do it this way, or maybe you might want to think about this possibility, and blah, blah, blah. And that you would have more of a submissive approach to solving the problem. That is what people would lead you to believe. But Abigail didn't do this. She just went straight to action. Now, this could be an edge case in that whole conversation of what is considered, you should go talk to the person versus you should just go ahead and do what you need to do, because they didn't really have time, right? Abigail needed to get to David and change his mind before David and his men just started slaughtering people. Because once David got across the threshold and started attacking, I don't think there was going to be a lot of time for discussion. And also at that point, it would be like, oh yeah, now that you see I'm going to kill you, of course you're going to give me hospitality, right? Like, I don't think that would have been the time for that. So she was trying to act in a timely manner. And I think that her having a conversation with Nabal probably would have just slowed down the process, and she knew that. So she just did it. But I think it's interesting to point out, because it proves that in some situations you need to just do what's right. And it also, the fact that Abigail is praised and is obviously her actions saved a lot of people, we know that she was doing the right thing. So when it is right, you are supposed to do the right thing. In all cases, you're supposed to do the right thing, right? And you are responsible for that. Another thing that I noticed before we get to the point that I wrote down, there is a point that I did not write down. So if you look in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 18, starting in verse 18, this is where Abigail starts to prepare the feast or the hospitality that she's going to give to David. So the servant has just told her what happened, and she is deciding what to do right now. And this is what it says. I'm going to read it out loud because the sheer magnitude of this is overwhelming. Okay. Abigail wasted no time in taking 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already prepared, 6 quarts of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 fig cakes, and having them loaded onto donkeys. I'm not sure that I know how to find 200 loaves of bread anywhere other than the grocery store. Like, if someone were near my house right now, if somebody was to walk by my house right now and I was to need to provide for them, I don't even know if I have 2 slices of bread, let alone a whole loaf, let alone 200 loaves of bread. Like, what kind of household did they run that she could just pull out 200 loaves of bread on the fly to give to somebody? And 5 sheep that were already prepared? Y'all, a whole sheep already prepared, already cooked, roasted, everything. Just like, that is amazing, right? Like, when we talk about hospitality and being prepared for guests and all this, this is just a whole nother level. I was like, oh, wow. Now, of course, remember, because as people will often talk about women and being, hosts and stuff like that. She had servants. She was telling the servants. I don't think Abigail cooked all of this. I'm just saying. Just want to throw that out there. But the house was well prepared to receive guests, clearly. So she does this, and then the next thing that stood out to me is when she actually gets to David and she's having this conversation. There are 2 major things that stood out to me about her conversation with David. The first is that she actually insulted her husband. Abigail says to David, "Please, my lord, shouldn't pay any attention to this worthless fellow Nabal because he is just like his name. Nabal means boor, and his boorish stays with him." Or his boorishness stays with him. Okay, number one, that's definitely not submissive, right? That's definitely not the wives submit to your husband that people are always preaching and telling us that this is how we're supposed to behave. But it's also not what I would think you would say. But she threw her husband all the way under the bus. Like, he's a bore. He's boorish and he has no idea what he's doing. He's not worth your time. Don't pay any attention. Take my apology. Like, that's kind of wild. And then after she does that, she turns around and she tells David his own flaw. She says to David that he should forgive her. He should do the forgiving, because if not, he's going to commit the offense of shedding blood, and vengeance is not supposed to be for him. Vengeance is supposed to be for the Lord. And that is, that is powerful. Now, she knows that he's going to become king because she talks about how he's going to be made to rule over Israel. And she says that if he goes ahead, then that's going to be held over him. But if he forgives them and moves on, then this will not affect him taking over the reign over Israel. And so that's kind of a bold statement. That's definitely her telling him what it is. And so this is not typically how women of God are portrayed in the church, but she has a lot of characteristics that are bold and outspoken and not necessarily submissive. And I thought that was interesting because she's also still painted as a woman of God, and she did great things. Now, the last thing that I wrote here as a thing that stood out was about this marriage that happens after Nabal dies. So David sends for Abigail and marries her. And the question that I had was he smitten by the fact that she mediated the situation? It says that she was beautiful, right? So he might have seen her. She was beautiful. She mediated the situation well, and he may have developed a lot of respect for her. So that's possible that he loved her. But it's also possible that it was just out of duty. You have to remember that during this time, women didn't have a lot of rights by themselves. So once her husband died, technically she didn't really own that property. And so, they weren't necessarily allowed to live there on their own and things like that. So she could have become destitute from the fact that her husband died. And the fact that she clearly lived a wealthy life because Nabal was rich, and she was probably rich growing up because typically rich people marry rich people. David may have just wanted to provide her with the same lifestyle because she had done that for him, and he knew that she was a decent person. It may have been, kind of just like, this is my duty to take you under my wing. And so that may be why he married her, because David would have been wealthy as well. I'm not really sure because we don't really get, a huge detailing about it. And of course, we know that it is Solomon, his son through Bathsheba, that he passes the crown onto, which would be a younger son. But this also mirrors the favoritism that we see Jacob give to Joseph, who was the first son of his favored wife. So I'm not necessarily sure how David actually felt about Abigail to end up marrying her, or if it was just that because she had shown her value and her intelligence, that he gave her this position just out of the fact that, he wanted to care for her. Because we see at the same time he talks about taking this other woman as a wife, and eventually he goes back and gets Michal, his first wife, who was wrongfully taken from him. So I'm not really sure from a romance aspect what was there. That being said, I asked myself, what is it that we're meant to learn from Abigail? How does her story relate today? And are there any ways to improve upon what she did? Now, I asked that question because I think that a lot of times we make the mistake of thinking that the people in the Bible are perfect. The only person described as being perfect is the Messiah. Everyone else is and was flawed. Therefore, there's always room to say, well, maybe this could have been done better. Now, we have to be careful because we don't want to be judgmental, but there's always rooms to look at this. It's just like with ourselves. When we handle situations, we do the best that we can. There have been situations that I look back on where I'm like, I think I did the best that I could in that situation. I don't think it could have ever played out any other way. But as I've grown or as I've gotten older, I'm like, maybe this could have been phrased differently, or this could have been said like that, or maybe I didn't have to say this piece right here. And that might have been a better way of doing it. And I'm asking the same question about Abigail. The first thing that popped into my head was, in fact, the insult that she gave to her husband. I do think that it is important for her to have created that mediation and to made the situation right. But I'm not necessarily convinced that she had to throw her husband under the bus to do so. She could have said, he doesn't know what he's doing. Or, I guess that would have been very similar. But, I'm not sure. I guess as I'm saying it out loud, I'm not really sure how she would have convinced David not to pay her husband any attention without insulting him. But it's one of those things that I think possibly could have been handled in a slightly less direct, less blunt manner. Like she calls him boorish, perhaps saying like he's not, he doesn't have proper etiquette or he wasn't trained properly and that's why he behaves like that, or he's going through some things and that's why he behaves like that. Maybe something that softened that just a little bit so it's not just like a smooth throw him under the bus and run him over type of a situation. Another thing, this is more so under the what are we meant to learn, and I wrote up here in very big letters, tone is everything. So Abigail, like I said, she threw her husband under the bus, but she also told David what he was doing was wrong. And I think how she said it, how she worded it, is very key. I personally struggle with being blunt, and sometimes I don't see what I'm saying as being something that I need to soften because I don't think that it's personal. But I am better now than I used to be about realizing that something may be personal to someone and trying to say it in a tone that conveys my heart, right? Like sometimes what we're saying is true and it needs to be said, but we need to make sure we're saying it in love, right? That we're saying it from a place of love and not from a place of apathy, which is generally my problem, is that I haven't thought about it. And so it comes out kind of apathetic, or from a place of hate, right? You definitely don't want to be speaking from a place of hate. And so in saying like, hey, you are, please don't kill us because you're going to be taking vengeance upon yourself and it's something that belongs to the Lord. There's a difference in saying it in a tone that says, I am concerned about you and your future. You are meant for great things. You're meant to be the king. And if you do this, it will look bad upon you when you go do this, versus saying it in a manner that just sounds like you're saving yourself, versus saying it in a manner that sounds like you are judging the person. You're not even that good of a person. You can't be out here trying to kill my husband because you're doing the same thing by trying to take vengeance upon him when it's not yours place to do that, right? You see the difference in that? And I think that's one thing that I definitely picked up in this passage, is making sure that we watch our tone in how we speak if we are correcting people. And again, I'm saying this because I'm doing this series for women and about women, but that's something that goes for both genders, okay? That's not solely a woman thing. We all should be watching our tone and watching how we say things to people. So those were some of the things that I really started to pick up from this story. And I started to ask myself, how does this apply to today? And, there are a lot of times where you may need to correct people or you may need to apologize on behalf of other people. As a single woman, I don't necessarily have a husband that I need to, apologize for. Sometimes women need to apologize for their husbands, maybe their boyfriends. But, sometimes we need to apologize for our friends. One thing that I've noticed a lot when you watch movies, teen movies, you have the mean girl and she's picking on someone. And sometimes I think that, you look back and you're like, perhaps I should have been apologizing for my friend's behavior. Perhaps I should have been approaching people and been like, hey, so-and-so was really wrong when she said that to you. And I just want you to know that, I'm sorry that, I couldn't stop her or that I didn't do anything or blah, blah, blah. Sometimes we owe people apologies for the company that we keep, essentially. And I think that's something that pulls into our modern society. This is also true of the church in general. I have definitely been in a situation where I witnessed someone being mistreated at a church, in a church building is what I mean. A member of that community said something that they should not have said. And, finding that person and being like, hey, I just want you to know that is not what the church stands for. That's not what this church stands for. And I want to apologize on behalf of the church and on behalf of that person, blah, blah, blah. I think that's very important to be on the lookout for and to be able to humble ourselves, to take that upon ourselves. And speaking of humble, that is what I wrote on the next page. So in thinking about what I was supposed to learn, I was asking myself, what traits is it that Abigail had? Because that's one of the biggest things. If you want to be a woman of God, if you want to embody these women who were doing great things in the Bible, what traits do we need? And one of the first things that I thought of was that she was humble. She apologizes. She says it's her fault. She says, forgive me, even though she had nothing to do with it. She's not the one who denied him the food. She's not the one who acted a fool and said all kind of crazy things, but she's just the one who made it right. And she could have said, yo, my husband is tripping, blah, blah, blah. Please don't kill us. She didn't have to apologize. She didn't have to say it was her fault, but she did. She went there at a place of humility. And in a way, I think it's also in a sense that, we haven't been able to affect someone yet. And yes, I'm not saying it's our responsibility to change people. That's the Holy Spirit's responsibility. And it's not our responsibility to fix people per se. But at the same time, as Christians, not just as women, as Christians, we're supposed to be showing the love of God. We're supposed to be walking in the character of the Spirit. And that is supposed to convict people. It's supposed to help people. And in theory, if we are living in that walk, if we are walking the walk and not just talking the talk, then we should have an effect on people. And so sometimes, I've been there. I've been like, man, am I failing? Is it me? Because I've been trying to persuade somebody to change in this direction, and it hasn't worked. And so for her to have been married, I don't know how long she was married to Nabal, and maybe she just felt like, I've been talking to him about being more hospitable, and it's my fault because I haven't gotten through to him yet. And again, like I said, I'm not saying that it actually is her fault, but having that humble spirit as opposed to it's not my responsibility is definitely closer to where we're supposed to be on the spectrum of how we feel about it. So I definitely admired her humbleness in going to David the way that she did. But interestingly, in contrast to being humble, she was also bold. Homegirl was bold. Okay, she did this without her husband's permission. She told David, the future king of Israel, that he was wrong. He was just as wrong as her husband. I mean, she didn't say it in those words, but that is exactly what she was saying. So there is some boldness on top of this humbleness. You can be bold and humble at the same time. Now, it's a balance. I don't know if I've necessarily figured it out. I feel like I kind of teeter between them, but I'm working on it. My goal is to be both bold and humble. She was also courageous. Hi, Allie. Allie is joining us for this now. But Abigail was also courageous because that takes guts. I mean, what if Nabal hadn't dropped dead, right? Like, what was he going to say when he found out she took all this food and stuff and disobeyed his orders and went and gave this stuff to David? How was he going to react? What was he going to say about that? She also was quick thinking because, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of time for her to react. Like, David was coming. She needed to appease him quickly before he got there and started killing people. So she was quick on her feet. That's part of this intelligence situation. Another thing that I wrote was that she was knowledgeable concerning God's expectation. At this point, there's a couple of things I'm not sure about, but what I do know is that she knew that vengeance belonged to God. So she was at least studied enough or versed enough, faithful enough in the spirit to know what was right and wrong morally in that situation. So that's where that comes from. There's also a possibility that she had some sort of gift of prophecy. David had been anointed the next king of Israel, but was that popular knowledge? Like, I mean, today we got like Instagram and stuff and people tweet things and it's hard to keep secrets, but I'm not really sure that Samuel just walked out and was like, so I have now anointed David to be the next king. Saul is irrelevant, right? Like, no one really made that announcement. So when she says that he's going to be ruling over Israel, how does she know? Now, it could have been rumors, right? Because, like, obviously Saul is trying to kill David. And so we know, and David technically was married to Saul's daughter. So there was some claim to the throne there in some ways, even though technically it should pass to a son and not to a daughter. But the son would, loved David as well, so he probably would have handed him the throne had Saul given him Jonathan the throne. So like there may have been murmurs about it, but it's also possible that she was prophetic and that the Spirit told her who David was. The other two things I wrote on the other side here, prepared and patient. I mentioned earlier, she pulled together a bunch of stuff. Like it's almost as though she had like that gift of hospitality where she was ready to entertain somebody at the drop of a hat. I personally do not have that gift. If you show up at my house unexpected, I'm gonna be sitting there like, I have a bottle of water. I might not even have a bottle of water. I might be offering you some Coke. I might be like, I have a bottle of Coke. I'm not often prepared to entertain people because, number one, I didn't grow up in a house where we had people coming all the time. And I don't generally have visitors, especially now that it's COVID, right? So I just don't typically I'm typically not prepared for that. And so I thought it was beautiful that she was prepared. And it kind of gave me that kind of reminder to be prepared. I'm always fussing at myself when I drive in the city and I drive by, like homeless people and I'm, they're asking for things and I'm like, I wish I could give you something, but I don't have any cash. I don't have anything useful on me. Like I don't have anything that I can give you. I would literally have to go to the store and come back to give you something. And that's kind of not prepared because I know when I go in the city, there's going to be homeless people there. And so I really admired her preparedness. And I think that's a trait that I could stand to adapt and work on. And then the other thing is patience. For her to have been married to Nabal and still been married and still have gone and tried to save him. Because let's be honest, even though David said he was going to go kill everyone, he was specifically talking about males. He probably would not have harmed her at all. But she would have lost her husband. She probably would have lost some of her servants. We don't know if the servant that came to her was male or female. And then David might not have shown favor upon her. And so she may have been destitute in the aftermath of the murder. But she could have just sat there and let it happen. And it probably wouldn't, she probably would have survived. And I don't know what she would have done afterwards, but she could have done that. But she had some level of patience that she was willing to put up with him, that she was willing to try to fix his mistakes, that she was able to humble herself. All of that takes patience. And even the fact that she was patiently talking and explaining to David what was going on, as opposed to just putting the food there and saying, please forgive me, and then ending it right there. There's a lot of patience that happens there. So I think all of these qualities are important and things that we all as women of God should be embodying. They are a lot harder to actually live out than to write out. I can say that from personal experience. So I will be praying for myself as well as for you guys to be able to do these things on the regular. And of course, that is the first thing I listed on how do we get better at having and displaying these qualities: prayer, studying the word, and practice. Now, I wrote practice with the thing in mind. There's a saying, fake it until you make it. And it may not be the best saying in the world. And I've heard other people say that this is not correct. But in my experience, when you tell yourself you're happy, eventually you become happy. It's hard. It's not easy. I'm not trying to negate feelings. And obviously, if you have real mental health issues with depression or something like that, you should go seek therapy. I'm not talking about surface level things. I'm talking about I'm at work and I'm bored, or I'm at work and I'm agitated, and I tell myself I'm not agitated, I am happy, and I am glad to be having this conversation. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about minor things. When you practice it, it starts to become natural. I actually did this recently. I have a coworker who is very, very nice, very, very nice person, but I struggle tremendously with understanding what they're saying. And I struggle tremendously trying to have conversations with them that are technical. Personal conversations are not as bad, even though I have a little bit of trouble understanding them. There's not a lot on the table. But when it comes to actually doing work and trying to explain what needs to be done, it becomes very difficult. I have trouble understanding his questions. He has trouble understanding my answers. I don't even know if I'm answering the question because I didn't understand the question. And so something that I feel like should have taken, like 2 minutes to explain can end up taking an hour. And so I found myself getting very impatient, very annoyed. And so I started trying to reframe my mind, practice that, when they would ping me, I would be like, I'm happy that you're reaching out to me. I love talking to this person, right? I definitely hijacked my own thoughts to make sure that I'm thinking in a manner that will grant me patience, and that will help me to be patient while I'm having the conversation, right? Talking to myself like, if the situation was reversed and I was in a different country, I would really want somebody to be patient with me and try to understand me. And so as I kept doing this, every time this person pinged me, I would hijack my own mind. You are excited to talk to this person. And as I was talking to them, when I would feel myself getting frustrated, it's a redirection. You're not frustrated. You're enjoying this conversation. You are enjoying this chance to dive into this material deeper and to get a better understanding of what you guys are doing and trying to accomplish on this team, right? Hijack that conversation. Practice. And now it's been maybe like 2 months since I started doing this. And now I don't get frustrated in conversations with him. Now I don't have to hijack my brain and start telling myself. It just happens naturally. It has become a habit. And so this is what I mean by practice. And I'm sure I will have to do that often with other people, but it's a thing that we have to do. You have to stop yourself from having negative thoughts. You have to stop yourself from, being prideful. You have to stop yourself from being scared, and tell yourself that you're bold, even if you don't feel like it. So practice, fake it until you make it. Definitely the lesson that I took from here. And the last thing that I wrote was a quote directly from Abigail when David sends his servants to bring her back to become his wife. She says to the servant, "Your servant is here to serve you, to wash the feet of my Lord's servant." And I thought that this was interesting because it is almost a foreshadowing. When we get into the New Testament, we see Christ washing the feet of the disciples. And I think it's interesting because a true leader is always willing to serve. And so even though the woman is said to be submissive to her husband, she is serving by washing the feet, just like the Lord washed the feet of his servants. And that is also a very, very good sign of leadership. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. Thank you for tuning in. As always, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I hope it was edifying and that you learned something from it. I hope that, as we continue to go through these things, you will start to see more and more beauty in being a woman of God if you don't already see it. As always, leave me any feedback that you have, and I will talk to you guys again soon when we talk about another topic relating to women of the Bible. Bye, guys.